Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Queermonger Institute, its board of directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporters, I want to thank you to our Q&A lecture series. It's within the mission of the Institute to balance out our own experiential research with the academic understanding that's available to us today. Dr. Goodman provided us a roadmap of how someone with a scientific approach can delve into the world of direct experience. And no educational institution can thrive alone. It takes an open approach. So we invite scholars of parallel research in related fields to help broaden the scope of our research and our exploration. And as a global family, we're trying to stay connected to each other. In these times, it's become critical. So on the positive side of things, we're using technology to expand our community and to expand the conversation. Today, we're tackling a core aspect of the mission of the Queermonger Institute. That's to introduce, sustain, and support the practice and research of trance states we believe once were widely used by our early indigenous ancestors worldwide. So today, we're pleased to have a very special guest. And introduce him, that was a hard sentence for me to say, don't try that at home. Let me turn it over to Laura Lee, my wife, who's the Director of Research, Outreach, and the Development for the Institute. Laura Lee.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I have to thank Tony Hull for introductions to today's guest and so many other fascinating people. Thank you, Tony. I want to also say that not only is it fascinating to look at the worldview of cultures around the world and through the ages, it's really important to know that our take on the world today, our take on reality, our take on us is not the only one to note or that's important or that has wisdom to share. And so with Frederick Smith, we will look at India's today. India has a place in the origin story of this Queermonger Institute. I'll just briefly mention, it was a paper by a Canadian psychologist, V.F. Emerson, in the early 1970s that Dr. Felicitas Goodman saw his paper on yoga postures, and it was that paper that alerted her that postures make impact on our physiological state and on trance states. He was looking at worldview as the important thing in yoga postures, but her research has been all about the physiological impact, independent of belief systems, since she found this all over the world. The physiology was the thing and the key, and he was finding that heart rate, galvanic skin response, breath rate, even motility of the intestines, I have no idea how you measure that, was impacted when people were sitting in simple yoga postures. Of course, her research being the indigenous cultures of the world, she said, I know where to find postures in their artwork, and she was off and running. So today we will look at India with Frederick Smith. He's a professor of Sanskrit and classical Indian religions at the University of Iowa, a Vedic scholar and translator of many decades. Much time he has spent in India looking not only at his own work, but also practices, ceremonies, trance states, ritual across the continent. So, Fred, welcome. Good to have you here.
Fred, you got to unmute your mic. Okay.
We have questions for Fred. We'll host stories. He's got a slideshow presentation, and we have a leisurely 2 hours to spend with him today. It will go fast because we have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, I will. Oh, there he is. Okay, Fred.
I unmuted myself.
There you go.
Hi, and welcome. And who's on your shoulder?
Who's on my shoulder? My alter ego. You can say my totem animal, except I hesitate to use the word animal with respect to him because he's been with me for 35 years, and
Long lives.
And so we're kind of a bonded pair, you might say. And anything that I ever say that's intelligent came straight from him. And if there's any mistakes, blame it on Papageno. That's his name.
Well, tell us a little bit why you got interested and made your life's work India. And it's
well, why did I do that? Well, people ask me this question quite a lot. They say, why have you, why have you dedicated yourself to the study of Indian religion or whatever? And, there's all sorts of different reasons, and none of them would be wrong. But to look for a single reason, and just like to look for a single reason might also be wrong. I was drawn to India from a very, very early age, and don't even ask me why, because I grew up in a house, a educated family in Santa Fe. I was born in Santa Fe, and nobody there had any real interest in India. Nobody I knew growing up had any interest in India, but I did from a very early age, and so I ended up going at about the age of 18, 19, staying for about a year in a college in the city of Madras, now Chennai. And kind of the rest is history. Without going into too many details, I ended up going back about 4 years later, I guess. I'd completed an MA in Chinese, and I'd realized that that worthless teenager though I was, I did have some talent for exotic languages. So I did dedicate myself to the study of Chinese and then to Sanskrit, and for some reason completely unbeknownst to me, my karma led me to Iowa, of all places. And here I am to this day, just set to retire in about 6 weeks. And
Congratulations.
yes, it's been a life.
I see that you're still proud of your New Mexico heritage. You're wearing the
Yes,
New
I
Mexico
am.
symbol prominently on your shirt. And you spent a lot of time in the Himalayas. You have a home there. Will you continue after your retirement?
My retirement plans are fluid depending upon, well, I mean, I thought I'd be retired already, and I thought I'd be in India by now, because the plan was to go to Italy. My partner Alberta, she's on screen here someplace, from Milan right now, and then go to India to spend half a year, and then maybe back to New Mexico. But let's just see what
We're
happens.
glad to have you here, Fred. So
I will say, I mean, to keep politics out of it, but it's much more encouraging for me to stay in the country as a result of the actions of this past week. I was prepared to pack up and leave, but I'm not completely discouraged now.
yeah.
But that said, I lived for about 8 years in a city called Pune, Pune, about 112 miles southeast of Bombay. But now I've got a house up in the Himalaya, like Laura was saying, where I've become quite interested in the geography and the performance. I went up there, really I moved up there because I was translating a Sanskrit text, part of this big epic, the Mahabharata, that really took place up in the Himalayas. And I wanted to be up in Mahabharata territory while I was doing this translation.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing led to another, and I decided not long after that, I went up there to, well, I'm going to just buy a place up here. So I did. And gradually, and then sold that place off and bought another place up in the mountains about a half an hour, 45 minutes away. And then built a house along with a friend of mine. And we've got a big and beautiful house that overlooks this valley, and you can see 20,000-foot mountain, and all is well if it wasn't for COVID ravaging the area.
So what most do you want your students to know? What are you trying to convey as you teach? This culture, its texts, you do a lot of translation. What do you most want to convey to them, to us? What's transferable in terms of its wisdom, its key insight, its core?
Yeah.
For us today.
I guess that's kind of gets at why I did decide to move up to the Himalayas, and that's that What I discovered after I moved up there to do this translation project is that every town, every family or clan name, every river, every temple, everything was relevant to this ancient epic, the Mahabharata. However, not in the form that you'll find it in its old Sanskrit text, but the whole thing is there. So people see themselves through the prism of this ancient text and of this ancient life. In other words, there's a kind of a permanence. There's a continuity, a ubiquity to the Mahabharata in this part of the Himalayas. And what I saw was like an interpenetration of the personalities of the individuals, of the families, of the clans, of the animals, of the temples, of these interlocking pilgrimage routes that are so numerous that would take a whole team of people just to be able to map them out. And I started a bit of that work myself, but I see that it's just an enormous project for like 25 people to do. And so what I wanted to convey, I guess, to my students, and maybe a little taste of what's going on here in this morning, is that we see ourselves as unitary personalities, persons, and this is colored in Western culture by this notion of a single, autonomous, unchanging self.
Mhm.
And
You say we're quite permeable.
and what I've discovered and what I've been working with in all sorts of different academic and personal levels is kind of what they use the big academic word, problematizing this whole notion of the autonomous self, that we're really mixed, our personalities are just not as completely ours as we would like to believe they are. And in a way, everything that we do in life is characterized by this whole phenomenon of dissociation. We dissociate. We focus in an extreme way on other things, and this allows us to become slightly different than who we are. And I wrote
Talking
this
about
big book.
trance. Yeah.
Yeah, about trance and so on. I wrote this big book on the phenomenon of possession in India from both historical and contemporary perspectives. There's been a huge amount of work on it by anthropologists in particular, and not much by classicists such as me, but I tried to even it out in this book. You can look at Phyllis Goodman's work, in which, I mean, some of her works really did influence my writing of this book. She had a book called Where Spirits Ride the Wind, which was published in 1990. It makes a strong case for positive correlation between physical posture, spirit or deity possession, and states of altered consciousness. That's what it's all about with the Kremlin Institute, as far as I can tell. And this is something that was really, really evident to me in my work with both traditional culture and performances in contemporary India, and with modern performances, some of which I'll show you some of those slides today, but I just want to start out with a couple of slides. Can I just put it on
One
share
thing you
screen?
say is that what the ancient practices were have become remarkably moved forward in time, unchanged. You commented on that.
Yeah, unchanged or changed in just certain particular ways. But let me just share my screen here a second and show you a couple of things here. Let me just bring up desktop here. Let's go to this.
Yep, we can see it.
Now that's some extreme yoga. Oh my.
Okay, this is not for everybody. Do not try this at home.
Yeah.
Uh, this is called Khandasana in the Iyengar yoga system. This is uh, not for everybody, put it this way. But one of the most intriguing um, uh, seals from the ancient Indus Valley civilization, which flourished from the earliest the archaeologists can, whoops, wait, what did I do here? How did I go forward? Okay, let's go back. Let's stop. Back. Okay, there we are. Kardasana. So this figure here on the right, scholars give the name Pashupati to it, the lord of animals, lord of creatures. We do not really know what it is at all, except that it's a figure that looks like has buffalo horn headdress, sitting in a Baddha Konasana or Khandasana or something like that, something with the knees stretched out evenly on the floor and the arms up along resting on the knees. This looks very much like a yoga posture. There's a mask also, and we don't quite sure what the mask means, but we see the animals around it. The tiger, different buffalo, elephant, various rhino animals that are there, plus some characters written in one of the only scripts in the world that's never been satisfactorily deciphered.
Interesting.
The Indus Valley script, which the earliest traces of that go back to 3000 BCE. And then it just kind of died out around 17th or 18th century BCE. There's a huge amount of seals with steatite seals with these and plenty of other characters on it, but nobody can quite agree on what it means. But so we don't know whether that's saying that this is a certain emperor, this is a certain shaman. It looks very shamanic to me.
Yeah.
So there was, I think we can pretty safely posit that there was a shamanic culture in those days. And here is this shamanic figure on top of what looks like a small podium.
Mm-hmm.
It does look like a predecessor to what was called Pashupati in later Sanskrit textuality, the lord of animals, who came to be identified with Shiva, but there's no evidence of that in this seal from 2500-ish BCE. Anyway, we do know, we can tell from this and a few other similar seals from the IVC, the Indus Valley Civilization, that there was this shamanic culture, and there's some dancing figurines and that sort of thing. It was probably the largest geographic-wise culture in the world in 2500 BCE, spread over an enormous area, bigger than any particular culture that they would have had in the Middle East, for example. But let me just move to the next slide here. And because what I want to just say right now is that there's, the notion goes very, very deep that we are composite beings, which runs completely counter to what I was saying about the Western idea of the autonomy of the self. And this has been typified and characterized in countless ways. I just got a couple of examples here. And here we have what's called the Yajna Varaha from a Vihara village near Bijapur in Gujarat, about the 10th century. Here we have Yajna Varaha, the sacrificial pig, basically. And this is not an uncommon image to see. There's a beautiful example of this in the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, if anybody ever wants to go. They have one of the best Asian collections in the US at Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, not far from here. and made a stone image of about the same period. And you can see that this is built on the notion of the god Vishnu, transformed into a large boar who dives down to rescue the Vedas from as they're being eaten up by demons and so on. I won't go too much into that, but we see the outlines here of different figures that are drawn on the inscribed on these stone images here. So mythologically, we can see that, and we see that in the West. We see this in alchemical imagery, and I've looked at a lot of alchemical imagery. That, fortunately for me, I have a close friend who's a genuine, real alchemist, and he actually has a collection of a lot of these things. So I photographed some of the stuff in his library. The sun and the moon and the whole notion of the philosopher's stone of bringing things together. I will say that one of the main distinctions, philosophically, religiously, spiritually, that we find in this whole paradigm of this shamanic paradigm is recognizing the complexity within, the fullness within of putting things together, making internal connections rather than separating things out. Here we have a painting that I saw in the Metropolitan Museum in New York by a guy named Bronner, done in 1946, immediately after he was a Jewish artist, and immediately after the end of World War II. I was going to put this in my book, but the publisher didn't like the idea. So they scratched this one, but here we have it. I even got permission from the Metropolitan Museum to use it. And here we have like the horse with everything within it. So the entire universe within the body of this horse. Everything was freed and liberated after the Nazis were defeated in World War II. So this is putting together the whole universe again after it had been destroyed. And here we have what's called the Kamadhenu, a pretty common image to find in India, where we have the cow here, with all of the deities within the body of the cow. And we have it within the body of the yogi. I didn't include any of those images here today because I have enough without that. But I just wanted to show you a little bit of these images here. I want to stop at that point, at least for the moment, and stop share for the moment and come back to that in a minute. Okay. But I did want to kind of give you just a little bit of indication about what the kind of shamanic sense that I've pretty much found everywhere I've been in India. And this kind of goes against what people usually say about India, what philosophers want to project, and what certainly the present Indian government wants to project, of a certain kind of branded Vedanta or philosophy of unity, of unification, which they would like to see represented throughout the world based on certain modern yoga practitioners like Vivekananda in 100 years ago and so on, more than 100 years ago. But what I've found is that from the time of the earliest Vedic text, the Rig Veda, up until the present, and you see this throughout in the Himalaya regions in which I hang out, is that there's a lot more possession, there's a lot more shamanic kinds of reckoning than has been hitherto believed. And in fact, I can go so far as to say that that you can find it in all eras of Indian textuality, from the Indian epics, Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Upanishads, ancient literature, to classical yoga texts and philosophical everywhere. And thing is that um, I will go as far as to say that the most common form of religious experience and expression in India always was and remains today possession, to be identified, to take on the self-identity of a certain deity. Now, this invites a certain kind of permeability, of penetrability, which is there built into the ways of seeing the world and reflecting upon it. Instead of trying to keep things out, the idea is to invite things in, but to do this with an understanding of how this is all both natural and utilized. And this was like when I, after many years of studying kind of mainstream, typical sorts of Vedanta and yoga and what's called Shastra, bodies of traditional knowledge, the way they are formally represented both in academia and in the Indian Panditic or scholarly communities. It's going below that. It seemed to me that like, Vedanta was like skin deep, but shamanism goes to the bone. At least that was my realization, and it took me many years in order to really articulate what especially in print, what I actually saw on the ground. And that's, I guess, what I would like to kind of convey to my students, is that there's this amazing, beautiful multiplicity that's represented wherever you go if you can only see it. And this is what the Vedic rituals were all about, that I studied in situ in the modern performances for many years in really from the 1970s, 80s, even so up to the present day. It's at certain, sometimes I'll go to some of these rituals and where I know all these people who, dying, a few people left in India still do this stuff. But, you can see from what I showed in that first slide there, the relationship between yoga postures and trance postures. And I know that the Kaimenge Institute is very concerned, dedicated to like the way that embodiment expresses deep archetypes, deep parts of ourselves, and how we can bring these out through adopting certain postures, working from the posture to the consciousness, rather than just trying to spin things out from projections within the state of idea of consciousness. And this is very attractive to me, that the Kaimenge Institute is doing this, because I mean, it's like yoga. If you take yoga seriously, you start from the body and then you work your way inside. If you start with meditation, you're only on that inside level and you'll never work your way to the outside, or rarely. You never say never. But the chances of doing that are not as great as working from the outside, yet knowing that there's inner dimensions. And there's a lot of people who work only on the outside, with their yoga. But yoga can also serve as a route to the inner worlds, just as shamanism can, just as the practices that Paul and Laura have been teaching can very well lead to these inner worlds. So what I try to convey to my students is that because I teach in a university, so they all sit in their chairs. They're all now on Zoom. They're all like these ethereal cyber presences on each other's screens, and so it's even another layer of
membrane to go through.
Membrane at some level of substantiality to sink into and absorb. I mean, it's interesting that way. Cyberspace is really an interesting spatial dimension, and
Well, no wonder you've been interested in our work. And I know the first moment we met you, we noted that there was a deep, deep connection. So this is exciting to explore this now. And yeah, thank you. I want to say, just to clarify, Goodman always said that what we're doing is ecstatic trance. as opposed to possession trance, because we're fully awake and aware throughout. And she defined possession trance as you go into a trance, something happens, and when you come out of it, you don't remember what. How do you define possession trance? How are you using?
Yeah, there's a lot of that's a good point. There's um, a lot of ways of looking at this within the stuff that I have actually studied and observed, and there are. I divide the whole field up into two. The notion of possession up into two broad groups, which you can call um, oracular trance and oracular or ecstatic trance, and maybe we can just make some distinctions even there on the one hand, and then disease-producing possession on the other, which I could call positive and negative possession. Positive being the oracular or ecstatic, and disease-producing being the way that possession is always represented in the West through horror movies. And so as far as most of the West is concerned, possession is about one thing, and that's horror. It's about stripping away our valuable, wonderful little personalities and turning them into demons and monsters. But one thing that I've discovered in working in India, especially at places where there's a lot of healing going on, and that's basically everywhere where there's possession. There's not everywhere, but most everywhere where there's possession going on, there's healing, there's oracular stuff, and that's really what I've been working on. But what I was going to say is that there was no notion of evil spirit.
Right.
There was no such thing. I looked for it. After it dawned on me one day that nobody's talking about any of these people who were clearly debilitated by negative possession, but nobody's talking about an evil spirit. Nothing. The word is never there. I asked about it in 10 different ways, 100 different ways, and it's just not there. There's the notion that there are certain wayward spirits of the dead that may be taking root or occupying the individual, have permeated into the personality, penetrated somehow or other for a period of time. But that is not an evil spirit. That is a spirit that simply needs to be taught. So the kinds of psychotherapy that are administered in these traditional healing centers, and some of which I went to in both North India and South India, is by directly addressing the possessed, or the spirit of that was itself, not the individual. So a person will go into the room, they'll come to a healing center, a possession healing center, a shamanic center, basically. And there's a bunch of these in India, where there is the shamanic healing that goes on. And it should be noted that they will only allow family therapy. No individuals are allowed in any of these places, whether it's North India, 1,000 miles apart from what they have in South India. This was a consistent, I noted this consistently. You can never go alone, because the idea that seems to have penetrated, and these are people with very little education. The place that I studied most thoroughly, the healer, the shaman, you might say, had a third-grade education, and his chief assistant, this brilliant woman who had the power to take on other people's demons or spirits literally for a short time. It wasn't her karma to take them on for longer periods, but she had a 6th-grade education, and they worked together as a team.
But a deep education in their work. Yeah.
Deep education, yes. They knew exactly what was going on, and so when they would work people into these certain trance states, usually through music and so on, the chief clinician, as I would call him, and the clinician's assistant, the guy with a 3rd grade and 6th grade education, he would step right in, and he would be standing off at the side of his temple, chain smoking, and then he put out his cigarettes, and he had this vision. He could see what was going on, and he would address the spirit, not the person who was possessed, not the person who was afflicted,
Right.
the afflicted being, the afflicted individual was, and he would just go in there and he would just question them. He would question the spirit, because this woman, his assistant, was able to capture that spirit temporarily and put the spirit in a place where there could be this interaction, this dialogue between the entity that was possessing the client and the chief clinician. And the dialogues were just really pretty incredible. Just to listen to these things, you could hear that being that was possessing this poor innocent individuals from these villages and poor villages, and he would walk in and he would say, "Who are you? Identify yourself." And obviously, this person would not be licensed in the American Psychiatric Association.
But it sounds like an exorcism. It'd be the Catholic Church.
And and he would get nasty with these creatures. He would say, in the most foul language you can imagine, for a psychiatrist, typical. You say, "Okay, you little motherfucker, reveal yourself. Tell me your name and why you're there and why are you making this family so miserable? And if you don't identify yourself in the next 15 seconds, I'm going to see that you go to the lowest hell world for the next 50 births and you'll never get out." Things like that. Imagine your psychiatrist telling you that. And generally you would hear a voice then coming and speaking, and he'd say, "Huh? I didn't hear that. Tell me again. That's not clear enough. Who are you and why are you there?" And it would go on like that for a while until the spirit would identify him or herself, and usually was somebody who died an accidental death in a car wreck or something like that, and or in a war or something.
A confused
Some situation. Yeah. So what was the purpose of this? It wasn't the job of the clinician's assistant to hold on to the spirit, but it was because the person who was boarding that spirit had a certain relationship. That's why it was there. So the idea was to loosen the bonds, and to turn this wayward spirit from a wayward spirit into somebody who was into a good spirit, the army of the good. There was a paradigm they worked with of the good spirits and the negative spirits. So the idea was to basically convert this spirit and get it to leave on its own, to become part of. This was the shamanic world in which these healers operate. I mean, I remember, I periodically remember something from the New Yorker in 1999 with respect to physics. There was a science writer named Timothy Ferris. Maybe people like Tony know who Timothy Ferris is. And who wrote that black holes can be postulated and surmised, yet from within which one may rest assured no reporter will ever file dispatches. That much may be true, but you might think the same thing of making a report from deep within the human personality of an afflicting spirit. And so what was the purpose of such a thing? And a lot of this work at this one particular healing center I did with an old friend of mine who was a psychiatrist from Finland, from Helsinki, who had practices both in Paris and Helsinki. He must be in his early 80s now, but he liked to go to these healing centers. He spoke really wonderful Hindi. And, I asked him, what is it that you as a psychiatrist, what brings you out here, every year for years on end, and he said, it's because they can do in a weekend here what it takes me 25 years to do with a client in Helsinki or Paris.
Then I want to bring up
And I
that
said, wait a minute, let me
Goodman.
just finish. And I said,
Sure.
well, what is that? And he said, it's the elimination of guilt for the whole, that's why you have family therapy, because if the whole family is there, then the notion that it's not his fault, it's not her fault, that can be dissipated in one weekend. And once you get rid of guilt, then you're halfway to a cure. In the Indian paradigm of looking at it, the spirit begins to work its way out of the individual and towards the spirit of good. Yes, Laura.
Finish your point about the individual. Yeah. I just wanted to say that Goodman wrote an entire book about this, How About Demons, in which he says that these things, the cures, are more effective than Western medicine. She talks about a case in which a young woman's family insisted she go to psychiatric medicine. She died from the drugs, from starvation, they didn't understand what was happening. And that also there's a specific protocol between the healers and the spirits. The spirits can't work on their own. They have to follow the specific protocol that is the ritual. And so there are rules between the two realms that one must follow to communicate, to exchange, to interact. And that it's very important that these rituals that have worked through time are maintained and known and understood and kept on, or we have no recourse in the future if they're all lost. That was her point. But go ahead. I just wanted to reiterate that it works similarly in the West, apparently, too. So she says. Go ahead.
Let me just do one other quote here, and then turn it over to questions for about 10 minutes, and then I want to get to something really specific. But I just can't, I've always wanted to read this quote to an audience, and since academics don't like it,
Well, here we go.
Bring it on.
For various reasons that you'll see. This is by Aldous Huxley in his book called The Devils of Loudoun, 1952, in which, where does it begin here? No man, however civilized, can listen for very long to African drumming or Indian chanting or Welsh hymn singing and retain intact his critical and self-conscious personality. It would be interesting to take a group of the most eminent philosophers from the best universities, shut them up in a hot room with Moroccan dervishes or Haitian voodooists, and measure with a stopwatch the strength of their psychological resistance to the effects of rhythmic sound. Would the logical positivists be able to hold out longer than the subjective idealists? Would the Marxists prove tougher than the Thomists or the Vedantins? What a fascinating, what a fruitful field for an experiment. Meanwhile, all we can safely predict is that if exposed long enough to the tom-toms and singing, every one of our philosophers would end up by capering and howling with the savages. And,
We always
I found
say,
myself to be one of those people who ended up capering and howling on occasion.
I have two comments, and one is, congratulations on doing the field work that you've done in crossing that barrier and really taking a look at where the evidence leads you. I appreciate when the academics and the scientists do that. It's not an easy road for them, I know, but thank you, because that's where the truth will lie. And also that we always say, hey, archaeologists, if you really want to know those artifacts, come and trance with us. Do the posture that the artifact is demonstrating. Maybe it is the ritual instructions that Goodman says it is. You'll learn a lot more about it. So that's my comment. What else do you want to say? Do you want to open it up to some questions? Do you have a question?
No,
He said 10 minutes.
yeah,
Before.
Fred, we got,
But then I want to get back to another thing I want to show on my
we had like 2 or 3 questions in the chat room, and I'm not going to
I
read.
didn't see them.
Rick, you had a question you want to ask?
Or chats. Oh my goodness, let me open it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rick, you want to open up by turning on your mic and asking questions? You're welcome to. Carla had a question. Chris Van Poel made a comment. And anybody, you're welcome in this next 10 minutes to ask a couple questions and see.
Oh yeah, let me answer those. I mean, Chris is a colleague, University of Missouri, and I value her comments and her thoughts greatly here.
Oh, there
And
she is. She's
there
coming
she
up.
is in the
Ah,
in incognito.
I
Um,
have low internet speed, so it keeps glaring out, so I keep my camera off. This
okay.
is really, really wonderful. There is so much that I have suspected and known from just reading other academic literature, but more toward the shaman side. And I actually had a paper rejected recently because I said that personalities can change, that spirits can be healthy, you can have possession, you can have disease.
Yes.
And it was just flat undermine my whole paper. So I was just really thrilled to hear you say that. I suspect, and I asked a thing about that. So do personalities change when you invite spirits in and you become possessed by that key deity that you're hoping to have with you? That changes a person's personality, doesn't it? I'm
Yes,
asking.
you find reports of that very early in the Indian literature. And one of the primary places where you find these is in the Indian medical literature. In text of the first, second century CE, AD, and where you have these catalogs of these different beings whom they are identified there, and what they do when a person, when they enter into an individual, or an individual enters into them, and the process is not always one way or the other.
Right.
And most of these are positive beings, but some of them,
Are nasty.
bring about certain conditions. For example, they would look at a case like spasticity as being possession by a certain being, and you can see some of this remnant in today's shamanic kind of practitioners. In India, there was one whom I knew extremely well, um, who was living in a house in Bombay with a family, and the family had this one son who had what we would consider a spastic um, uh, person. He suffered from spasticity,
Hmm.
um, and could barely speak or dress himself, and so on. And this person said that the reason was because, I know this is going to sound really off the wall, that in some past life he had been a certain person at a certain place and had done certain things. And if you address him with the name that he used in that last lifetime, like 400 years ago, then he will respond.
oh,
And so I asked him what it was, and he told me, and I mentioned it to this person who was otherwise completely spastic, and he responded
Mm.
with that name.
Yeah, wow.
So this would be another form of uh, of shamanic communication, as it
Right.
were,
Mm-hmm.
in there.
Absolutely.
Just the there's almost no limits on the different methods or modes of shamanic um, communication. We have like certain sessions that go on. And yes, your first question, Chris, yes, I did, of course, use both of her books in my own work.
Yeah, she
Um,
has great stuff, as Laura was also saying. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, your question there, does a person's personality change? Yes, the personalities do change. And there's a certain kind of session in North India called a Jagat, an awakening session, which is an all-night, it's only in the Himalayas as far as I know. And only certain parts of them at that, where you have these trained shamans who are uh, know certain songs.
hmm.
Um, and it's almost like, in this class I teach on religion and healing, that because of COVID, I've changed my whole course around this semester, but I used to give them a lot of stuff from some of Gladys Reichardt's and other books that you know about, of these Native American chanting. books that my father had, and I took them all off you know, when he died. And but one of the things I learned from these things is among Native Americans, I mean, let's say at least among the Navajo, the whole notion of private property didn't exist. But what did exist, what was private property, was chants, was songs. That was private property. And they were transmitted from one teacher to another. And as the individuals would die out, more and more of these chants would die out. And they were probably a whole lot more numerous than what's available to us today. That's kind of the same as what I saw up in the Himalaya. These people, it was within their specific lineages to know certain shamanic chants. And they would sing them, and gradually the deity would be awakened within the audience members. And many of them would respond in a certain kind of way. Some of them would get up and they would rotate counterclockwise. I mentioned this last time, but I saw this counterclockwise rotation, always counterclockwise.
Wise, you said that last time you talked, yeah.
There's different people here this time who might have more insights on that. And why that would be counterclockwise, I don't know. But then there would be a certain question and answer. The people would only be there because they had certain problems in their lives, in their families, in their communities. Like their cows would be dying, or they wouldn't have heard from their son in Bombay for a year, something like that. And they would want the shaman to go into their own worlds and learn what's happened to my son in Bombay. Why are my cows dying? Why are my crops not thriving when everybody else's crops are thriving? That sort of thing. So they would use their knowledge then and get this intermediate deity or spirit to communicate, to look within, and then through this process of communication between this dialogue between deity, oracle, and client, they could come up with answers to these people's questions. So it was kind of an old style shamanic consultation session that were going on, and I've seen a lot of these there. We still have another hour, but that's, I could reproduce some of these dialogues at some length for you if you want, but what are some other questions? Have you been reading them, Paul?
I'll throw a couple things at you from the chat room. Let's see. Linda asked the question. She says, I sometimes describe the postures of the Quirmangi Institute as body mudras.
Body mudras.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Mudras. So he said, is that dumb? No, I don't think it's dumb. It's an interesting.
Interesting. Define mudra, if you will, Fred.
Yes, geez, just funny about that. I just have right here on my desk. It's in Hindi, but it's a book on mudras. I don't know if I can get close enough. You can see what I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're basically hand positions,
Right.
and there's a whole bunch of them here that I have on this in this little book.
Interestingly, in our postures, we often have specific hand positions.
Yeah.
I just realized that I didn't have you spotlighted, so people didn't see what you held up. So
I
let me go back to you.
Anyway, this is the book. It's called Mudra Vidyana, or the science of mudras. And the way funny, I had this book sitting right here, is that every knuckle on the hand and every part of the palm, it's kind of is significant in certain ways, is labeled and given different names.
Why do you suppose it works? Is it because we're connecting energy points, or what's the explanation?
Exactly. And you have very, very unusual kinds of, and then there's a whole page description on the significance of these mudras.
Would that be their explanation as to why?
What's that?
And their explanation as to why it works, or why it's significant?
Yes, why that the hand needs to take this kind of shape in order has two sections. One is called well, first you have the name like the Bandhak Mudra, which is this one here, which means of capturing something. And then it's what can we get out of it? Why would we want to do it, and how is it done physically? And there's a whole catalog, and I can't get into that. Would be a whole different.
So body mudras is kind of an interesting term.
Yeah.
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 Now that you've held up the book, the question's coming up on the screen. Is this book available in English?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there may be other books or books on mudras in English that I'm sure there's books and mudras
I'm
on,
sure there are.
in
Yeah.
English.
What's
I
the
probably
application?
have
We
some.
need to move on.
Yeah, well, let's go to Brian Tucker's
But
question.
wait a minute, let me just say not just
Yeah.
mudras with the hand, but a mudra also means can be taken more generally to other kinds of body positionings.
So then Linda's right.
So it's
And mudras, and there's other body mudras.
it's a wisdom tradition that the position of the body makes a difference. Just as,
Oh yeah. This esoteric knowledge is really divided into a lot of very expansive specialty areas. Yeah. Was there another question?
in a future date, it would be interesting to explore some of these more unusual or interesting or ones that have a correlate with our positions and your positions from yoga and from the Indian tradition. Let's experiment with those at a future date and see. Take that position, but do it within our ritual.
Oh,
Wouldn't that be an interesting experiment?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Brian is up. Brian, you're on, so go ahead.
Yeah, Fred, this is really fascinating. I was, when I was first introduced to the work of the Kuya-Mange, I was at that time
highlight this. Oh, there you go. Okay.
practicing yoga, and I felt there was a lot of similarities in the postures of yoga with what was being practiced. Can you point us down the trail of some of the literature you've come upon, like that, the Vedic literature that talks more about trance state and the connection with posture? I know, for example, the Gita will instruct us on meditation. Shiva Puran will instruct us on meditation. There's not a lot that's said that I can find right now about trance state from a practitioner's point of view or, consciousness point of view.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and I've looked into, as have a few other scholars in the world, looked into what are the most ancient descriptions of yoga postures, and why do we have all of these postures with names like peacock pose, for example? What is it? Is it just that there's some kind of a resemblance to a peacock tail in peacock pose? Well, yes, but there's a lot of other things also. So some of the names of these poses were given fairly early on. I mean, the whole repertoire, of yoga postures has just really expanded, dramatically in the last 100 years or so. But there were some of these postures that were there, and there was always the notions of impersonations of animals within some of these other texts, especially interestingly, what comes to mind right now is in texts on the interpretation of literature, what's called Alankara Shastra in Sanskrit, where we find emotional states. You have like 8 or 9 different basic emotional states broken into 33 sub-emotional categories, and these are in some of these texts described as through what is it? These are to be identified within poetry, and these are to be striven for in poetry and poetic writing. Is, in other words, to each one of these emotional states, and this is really interesting from the shamanic point of view, that every emotional state, like Sringara, Eros, or Hasya, humor, Adbhuta, wonder, Shanta, peacefulness, quiescence, Bibhatsa, horror, all of these states and more, that's just some of them, can lead a person into a state of pure, it's almost like each state has its own enlightenment quality to it, as it's constructed of subcategories of mood that add up, of emotion that add up to this overall rasa or mood, of which there's 8 and some texts 9. And these are the states that are accessible through the most ideal poetic writing and absorption of, this is audience response we're talking about here. Just like I was saying that the shamans in the Himalayas want, are enlivening the deity within the audience. But yes, I mean, your question is a really good question, but where I find the answer, at least what that comes to my mind right now, most thoroughly is in the way that emotion and mood can be generated through music, through poetry, through literature, and especially through drama, through play. And I mean play in both words of, taking on impersonation.
Like theater.
And through theater and through taking on certain postures and positions.
And
you can see
trance.
this.
And trance.
And trance.
We have so much emotional content that happens in our trance experiences. So much of it bliss, joy, peace, acceptance, comfort, resolution of emotion. It's there. That's fascinating.
Yes, and even states like horror and wonder is a big one.
Awe and wonder, yeah. Appreciation, gratitude, yeah.
And these are all ecstatic states, regardless of whether it's something like horror.
Interesting.
There's like getting rid of the whole idea that negative emotion is always a bad thing.
Yeah.
But setting it for Tony.
Yeah.
Oh, Tony has his hand up.
Thank you,
Tony,
Brian.
Tony, turn on your mic.
Yeah, just a question. I'm fascinated by the states. I wonder if you could list, if not now, later, what these states are.
Oh yeah,
it would
sure.
be very valuable to have that catalog.
Yeah, definitely. I can.
Yeah.
Maybe I can send it to Laura and she can send it around. Yeah.
We will post that and make that available. Paul will.
Yeah.
I also want to know about divination. We'll be experimenting with some divination in the future, but the rishis, you say, in the earliest text, very much state they're going into a trance state to pull down some of that wisdom.
Yeah, divination, that's a really huge topic, and I don't think that there's any scholar that's gotten to the bottom of it in India. Maybe, I don't know, Vijay, maybe, I don't know, but I've seen probably no less than 25 or 30 different kinds of divination. Even just in
oil on a fingernail, lots of
yeah, I mean, I've seen people in Kerala do really interesting kind of dice divinations. Astrologers do different kinds of divinations. Astrology itself is a kind of divination. I've seen these ritualists do a kind of divination. In fact, let me go into my second little PowerPoint thing and let me just kind of, can I do the share screen?
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, share screen. Let's go here. And now let's go here. And let me put it up here. What I'm going to show you right now is 16 slides, I guess, I took at a ritual up in the Himalaya. Let me just tell you briefly. Almost nobody even knows about these things, unless you happen to be up there. People know about the Ram Lila or Krishna Lila, the plays, these dramatic performances on the life of Rama that happens once or twice a year in Benares and other places. And the Krishna Lila is the play of Krishna. Again, these are seasonal. They're attended by millions of people throughout India at certain season in August and in Vrindavan and such places. But this is called the Pandav Lila. The only happens in the Himalayas. The Pandavas were the 5 brothers that were the victors in this Mahabharata war. And various characters are identified with certain various dancers, performers, identify with the characters in the epic. They're identified to the point where they are possessed by these characters. They become these characters, and they take them on in a way as possessions. And these characters reside in their bodies, and they behave that way. I wish I had a video right here of the dance, because there's this dance step that's really nice. It's a beautiful little dance step that they do in these ecstatic states. It's obviously a learned kind of dance step. It's a short, quick steps. And anyway, maybe I can dig one of those up later. But here we have this Pond of Leela. So what happens here? This Pond of Leela is basically a performance in which the death of the main characters is kind of both celebrated and exorcised. And it's an ecstatic kind of performance, for sure. I've seen many of these. Probably hardly more than a half a dozen Westerners have ever seen any of these things at all. This is in a little village called Raithal, Raithal, about maybe 30 kilometers from where my house is in the Himalayas. There was no real road going there. You had to go like 4 kilometers by donkey or bullock cart or something else to get to this village. And this was on the grounds of a temple. And this big Pond of Leela performance was every 3rd year. It's done in the winter because the people aren't working in the fields. People come back from, it's too cold to do much work, and so this is when they do their performances. People are dressed up pretty thoroughly, except the performers, who are in their own states, so they don't know what it's like if it's freezing cold out there. It's all right. It's okay with them. This old gentleman here is Arjuna, the greatest warrior in the epic. Okay, the toughest. Well, he's not the biggest, maybe not even the toughest, but he's the most agile and the best warrior of all. He was able to shoot an arrow behind his back, the distance of 9 kroshas, of 9 miles, let's say, and knock the eye out of a wooden fish that was spinning on a pole. Okay, that's what a good shot he was. So this is Arjuna here. He may not look like Arjuna to you, but that's who he is. Let's move on here. And what he's going to do here is he's been playing this role of Arjuna. Arjuna has been within him for the last 40 years. He's old. He's retiring. He wants to transfer this person, this other being inside him, this Arjuna inside him, to his son in the ritual. So here he's preparing for this Abhisheka. Abhisheka means basically a coronation or a self, and there's purifications rituals is going on there. And now you can see, he's not exactly a spring chicken. Let me see if I can move this up out of the way. No, I guess not. Anyway, here he is with all of these things around his neck. It's unique. And I've questioned a lot of people. I mean, what are all these things? It's like a sacred thread over the left shoulder under the right arm, but there's a lot of other stuff there as well. And There's a large gallery of people. This is the women are there. A lot of men are there too. But mostly people have come home from the outlying areas for this Pandavlila that lasts about 10 days long. And my mentor and all this stuff, Dr. Purohit, he had never seen this before. He was just as puzzled by the whole thing as I was, but it was clear what was going on. That he was transferring this essence from himself to somebody else to act as the shaman for the next generation. So he's preparing for the self-abhisheka there. This is a kind of divination he's doing. You don't see it too much. I wish I had my video out, but I didn't. So he is in his trance state. He's in his oracular ecstatic state right now. But he's in enough of a control to take a handful of barley grains out of a plate of barley grains that the person shows him. And he throws these barley grains up in the air. And a certain number will get scattered to the wind, and a certain number will land back on his palm. A number between 1 and 7 barley grains will be left on his palm. And he'll count them. And depending on the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he'll count them out. And each number is significant and is part of the oracular key of how he should proceed next. This is a divination of how he should proceed next. Is the deity favorable towards this ritual? Is the deity think that there's a problem going to arise among women in the village, among men in the village, among, for the future, for somebody who's gone away, like that? There's different things, different numbers mean like that. So he takes this, he throws it up in the air, and it lands on his palm, and he reads it as in part of his ecstatic state. And now it looks like he's been reading it there because people are looking quite favorably on him. And now he does his next his next part of his abhisheka, where he pours water, or he pours actually a whole big copper pot full of milk on himself. This is what they do with deities. They, in order to do an abhisheka, a consecration of a deity, they'll pour milk and then water. There are a lot of other substances too, yogurt or smear it with turmeric paste or sandalwood paste, whatever. But this is a few things they do here, including purification by pouring milk over himself in order to bring about the state of purity. And next thing, now you see that he's had the milk abhisheka. He'll then pour water over himself. And then here he is again. He's about to take another pitcher of water, which he'll pour over himself in order to cleanse himself further. And then he'll get down. Here he's now dancing in his ecstatic state. And then he will dismount and passing the torch to this is his family. And I wish I had a video of this, because they're all doing this very short little dance step, going around counterclockwise, the way they do when they're possessed. And they're in this huddle. And this guy can't be a day less than 80 years old. And he is embracing his son, to whom he is passing on Arjuna for the next generation. The spirit of Arjuna is moving from him into the character of his son.
As an empty vessel. Yeah.
As an empty vessel. And Purohitji, my mentor there, one of the coolest guys I've ever known in India. And he was sitting there just like amazed, because he was clasping on with such force that it took a half an hour for several people to unclench the hands of this old guy on, from that of around his family members. That's the extent to which this possession was solid. And what I saw after seeing this, what I said to Purohitji after seeing this is, there's passages like, that describe this in the Upanishads. And I even mentioned what those passages are to him, you know, and that describe how how an essence is of a personality is transferred to somebody else on their deathbed through exactly the same procedure. Now, these people don't know anything about these Upanishadic passages, and they have no cognizance that there was any act, but there's obviously been something that's historically been transmitted, you know, for thousands of years, and you know, just the origins of it have been lost. But this was only used on this occasion, here they are again, and again, I took it out, and this is the deity that's come over, that's bowing down, that's blessing them. This deity is being carried around, and I would have to. Just 1 minute. I didn't do the video. What you saw there was the deity shaking, the dancing of the devata, the word for devata, that's the deity. And when the deity shakes like that, you know that there is something, and everybody who holds these palanquins from both sides will say that we have no control over it at all. The deity does what the deity does. We have nothing, no control over it at all. The final act, in order to set everybody free, is this genda, this rhinoceros. There's made out of kaddu, which is a kind of a bib pumpkin or squash. By the way, I did one of these for Halloween a few years ago here in Iowa, and instead of, this is what I did for my jack-o'-lantern. I put up a pumpkin rhinoceros, and I asked kids to guess what it was. I used like kale leaves for wings and for the ears and so on, and they all thought it was a flying pig. So I thought, all right, that's Iowa. The last thing that they do, here you have it. And now they're going to dance around here. And finally, oops, I guess that's the end. All right, I guess something happened to the last thing there. And anyway, they eventually just take a large sword and chop that genda, that rhino, in half. And it's kind of like zozobra at Fiesta in Santa Fe. Or, you know, it's like ending the end of death and the beginning of bliss for the community. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that, just to show you that this is all, this is a very sophisticated ritual that my man Purohitji in Himalaya has never seen before. So who knows how often it goes on, but it's you know, it's a real kind of, you know, you can splice together a lot of shamanistic strands there, from the dance steps to the costuming, to the masks, to the genda, to the rhino, and all of these things there. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you that.
It's so fascinating that though the steps and the iconography and the songs and everything's different, it follows the same essential steps. Over and over again, different variations culturally, but the same steps. Yeah. So
well, anyway, that's just a little bit of what I've been working with and working on up there, but I see these geographic networks of pilgrimage and possession and shamanism and costuming and masks galore. My man up there, Dr. Purohit, has a collection of masks, beat the band. I mean, he must have hundreds of them that he's both made and collected from various places up in the mountains that are used in all these ceremonies. And I don't know. I don't know. He was going to just retire and just like get rid of them.
They
Can't do that.
need to go to a museum. Yeah.
Yeah, or come to Santa Fe.
Fred, absolutely mind blowing. I'm just absolutely stunned at your research, and just what a pleasure to know you. I want to open it up for questions. I think a good thing to do is to go to the standard process of using you click on participants, and at the bottom of the participant list is an opportunity to raise your hand electronically. I'll also be looking for gallery view, raised hands, but it's hard for me to manage all of that. If I can see some electronic hands come up with questions, I'll go down in order as they come up.
And in the meantime, I want to invite you, Fred, to a masked trance dance that Felicitas instilled in the 80s when she was invited to Austria to take part in their annual Wild Man celebration, where the small towns tradition was to make costumes to celebrate the wild, the mystery of nature back before civilization, kind of like the Green Man in the UK. So we have to invite you to one of those.
I would love to go.
Mask making and dance, and where the steps are derived from the trance, where you ask for what are the steps of the ritual we should perform, and where a storyline with a coherent beginning, middle, and end and a purposeful intent just arises on its own. Fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just noticed a couple of things in the chat since I haven't
Yeah.
read it, in my own.
And I also
Pick one
asked,
out. Pick one.
I asked,
Hey, but just a couple of things. I mean, Marev Zehavi, where are you? Can you identify yourself by, are you still here?
Or do you want to read the chat that has?
I do, but I just want to see who he is.
oh.
Are you here?
Yeah, you could, if you unmute yourself, then we'll see you.
Marie, what did you want to know?
Oh, there you are. Okay. No, I just wanted to see a face on the name. That's all.
Hello.
When I'm teaching a class, I like to see who the people are that are asking questions. Question here is that I've tried mudras during the sessions. They don't work for journeying. They work great for healing my health problems.
Oh, that wasn't a question.
What's that?
It's
That
not
was-
a question. I'm stating my experience.
No, but your experience is I think a pretty general experience, in the sense that but when I saw that comment, I thought, yeah, that makes good sense, because mudras are kind of stationary, and for actual, to take a particular stationary situation, and use it, in movement, then you're going to lose that moment of concentration where, yes, it could be very helpful in healing situations, and maybe a little bit less feasible during actual journeying. Yeah.
Stephanie from Paris is asking, did you find it difficult to be accepted since you're considered a foreigner? How was their response? Did they feel protective or careful of you coming in as a person?
As a Westerner?
As a Westerner?
Well, I've always been kind of a odd man out wherever I am in life. And I guess living for a long time in India, I got used to the fact that I was, being almost 6'4", that I'm obviously noticeable. But I'm kind of a friendly guy, so people seem to
Warm up to you.
warm up to me, and as long as I can speak their language and
That helps.
be open, the most important thing is to be open, innocent, and if you have even the tiniest smidgen of pretentiousness to you, they will notice immediately, and you're out the door.
Actually,
And, they shut down immediately. You just got to be, just open your heart, open your mind,
That opens doors.
close your mouth and open your mind, and that's what I say at the beginning of yoga classes. Sometimes I used to be, time to close your mouth and open your mind.
And Stephanie said she actually lived 10 years in the Himalayas, so that's why she was asking the question. I should have had her come on with her microphone rather than me reading for her. And
Oh,
Stephanie,
Stephanie, where are you?
you're welcome to turn on your
Yeah,
mic
you're
and come
welcome
on.
to.
Then Lynn's got her
Stephanie.
hand up and Dory.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Sure.
Oh, bonjour.
Namaste.
You're in Paris?
I'm not in Paris. I'm in the south of France, close
Oh.
to Marseille.
Oh,
Yeah, with the chichadas and everything, it's better.
right.
So yeah, it was. Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to hear from you because I'm a outsider, we can say, of the yoga movement. We can call it like that because it's more than a movement now than a real tradition. There's a lot of science and stuff like that involved that take that path. What I found in my own practice by living there directly, you know, like nature opened many doors for me there. I lived in Rishikesh for 3 years and after in Pokhara in Nepal.
Oh.
And I come from a more Shivaist background. So it's more like the ecstatic way of living. And that's what catch me also in the trance posture is do you think that from the trance posture, as we say, the oldest one, we can partake in the session with the Kriyamunga Institute, that there is a link with the yoga posture after that are more like without sound and it come, do you see a link between the two? How historically there can be a link between the two? We have passed from this communality, shamanic, postural, ritualistic way of communicating with the other world to this very, you know, the yoga people know today.
Yeah.
Wonderful question.
We've explored
That's
that about
so,
the Thessaly
yeah.
posture that's the same in really old Indian sculpture, but go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead and address
Yeah.
that.
Right. I mean, the thing about a yoga posture is that, yes, there may be, is that the weight, there's always an attempt to weight the posture in a way that it will be balanced. That there will be a balance from the left, the right, the front, the back, you know, the top, the bottom, all of that. That's the point of yoga. Yoga is something that means something which is yoked. And you cannot have a yoga posture at all correctly done unless there is the achievement of balance, even if it's difficult. And you know, you gradually work into a place where that's balanced, and certainly that's true with shamanic positions too. I mean, if you look at all of the ones that are in that Laura and Paul deal with, there is a certain way that energetic forces, different energetic, that's the foreign thing about different postures, different balances, different hand movements, different ways of putting the legs, the feet, you know, the knees, everything, bending, twisting, anything. You know, there's certain energies that are captured, that are identified, that are constructed, that are manifested by putting these things in different places. You know, our hands, for example, we may think that we're doing something in a very unbalanced way, but that is only really in the further interest, it seems to me, and you know, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, of bringing about a state of adjustment to bring about a different or higher organization of balance, I guess, something like that.
We say through a shift you find resolution.
Yeah, through a shift you find resolution. Yeah, yeah, and that's the point of all the mudras that you know. Another thing from Marev here at the Nabhakalebara every 19 years in Odisha, the Adivasis renew the deity in ceremonies that are probably similar to the transfer you showed. Yes, I know about that. The word Nabhakalebara, in Sanskrit, Nava Kalevara, which means a new body, literally. Kalevara means a body, Nava Kalevara ceremony, where, yes, deities, they'll take an old, worn out, and I've seen people do this. There was a person I knew in Bombay who would make his own paper. He would go into this ecstatic trance state and manufacture a paper mache goddess, Durga, every 6 months during the goddess festival. And he would take the old one 6 months later, like in October, and go into the state and renew and perform these ceremonies and take the life, as it were, from the old Durga and put it into the new one. And this Navakalevara and dish is the same kind of process. Yeah.
Very
Interesting.
good. I can go to some more questions.
Thank you,
Lynn-
Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Lynn, you have your hand up. You turn on your mic. And after Lynn, Dory has her hand up. Okay, I'm waiting for you. There you are.
I have a similar question in terms of yoga and meditation. These practices, can they make us more sensitive to, I guess, spirit possession or some sort of energetic force? And like also, I'm not sure if you hear the word Kundalini thrown around a lot in India. Is that some sort of like energetic force or spiritual possession that can happen in Western society as well? And just
Good questions.
Yeah, those are good questions. Let me, before you get too much further, because there's a lot of little questions. Otherwise, my brain will be like a sieve and I'll forget your first question. Want to ask another one. So yes, it can open you up, and but the thing is that what you have to get over, what everybody has to get over, is fear. Once you move beyond the notion that I'm afraid to lose a part of myself, a part of my personality, once you can get yourself beyond that, then yes, you can open yourself up to these things. You're best doing this under certain guidance, people who feel really comfortable with it. Like my man in the Himalayas, Dr. Purohit. I mean, he's like the funnest guy I've ever known in India, in like 20 years in India. Ever known anybody who's more fun. But boy, does he have a sharp eye for seeing things. And he saw me in a state once, and he said, "Oh, are you in a certain?" And I was just like sitting in his house, and he walked by and saw something about me, and I realized that I was not quite with myself. And here he is, just this kind of happy guy, just kind of walking through the house, just noticing this. But yes, and I realized that, and I wasn't afraid of it or anything. But you have to get yourself into a situation, and usually, in an initiatory situation is a safe space. You have to be in a safe space.
There's protocols involved. Yeah.
There's what?
Protocols involved.
Protocols involved. If you can't just do it yourself. Do it yourself, and you're going to end up in some dead end. 99%.
Spontaneously without your intention, or in that case, like
safe containers. Yeah.
Yeah, safe containers.
In the second,
you're asking something else there also, Lynn, right?
You asked about Kundalini.
Yeah. Is that
Kundalini? Yeah, the word Kundalini. People don't really talk about Kundalini much in these places. Kundalini has become a big notion in Western yoga, a lot because of the Theosophical Society's involvement, and a guy named Leadbeater in about 100 years ago. This is not to say that the idea is non-existent in India, because surely it's very, very much there in esoteric circles and in yogic circles. And it goes quite far back textually, and you can posit that the idea was there really, really ancient in other kinds of ways of formulating it, even in the Vedic texts and further back than that. I've made such arguments. But they don't speak about Kundalini all that much. Their experience, I mean, regardless of whether they identify certain centers in the body where they do feel something, but they don't talk about it as in Kundalini, but you'll see from the actual postures that certain chakras, let's say, might be more thoroughly activated through specific shamanistic.
Because it's an experience. It's an energetic experience.
Yeah, it's an energetic experience without maybe transmitting the paradigmatic and prescriptive ideas of what it is to, a certain chakra is supposed to look like according to some body or other.
Right.
These
It happens spontaneously.
it can happen spontaneously, and it doesn't have to match what somebody else tells you it's supposed to be like.
Yeah.
That's the openness there. And that's why I've worked really hard in my own years in India to move away from the prescriptive and into what people are really experiencing,
Yeah.
and it's gotten to the point where I've gotten a little bit jaded about prescriptive stuff.
Yeah. Direct experience. That's the main message. These states are open to all of us. They're our birthright. They're achievable, and they are instructive. Yeah, in and of themselves.
Thank you for your
Thank you,
question.
Lynn. Where are you in the world, by the way, Lynn?
In Maine.
Ah,
Maine?
wonderful. In Maine.
Portland?
That's his home state. Yeah.
Yeah, Pine Tree State. Okay, so we'll go from the
Thank
Pine
you.
Tree State. We're gonna go to Santa Fe because Dory lives in Santa Fe. Dory, ask your question.
Hi, Dory.
Hello. Hello.
Bad.
Look at this mask. Oh my gosh.
So I took this out of the closet after your discussion of shamanic possession and practices. And so this being emerged, literally, I was at Koyamange and we were doing the initial trances to determine what your spirit being that you would dance during that week. And I was lying on my back, and this being literally walked itself up my body from my feet to my head and dropped into me. And so the rest of the week was the fun of, well, I did some research and what I could find was that it's a Buddhist priest who was not portraying evil or a demon, but it's called a demon dancer from somewhere in the Himalayas, and I don't.
Yes, I know about those. Yes.
Yeah, and so the idea is that it draws out the demons. It's not a demon itself, so it's got all the death heads at the top, and different animals. Mine was supposed to be a boar, so it's got a trunk here.
Very cool.
That's very cute.
It's very dusty. I'm like, so I need to dig it out of the closet and feed it. Apparently, at this point, because it's
Take care of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like your use of those Turkish eyes.
Well, so it's the old grab bag at Koyamange. People bring all sorts of fun things to put onto masks and costumes, and there's boxes of thrift store material. So I managed to somehow pull this together, and the dance itself. So then we all got together for our dance, and my personal experience was of being the expanded power that it looks like. And so, but the dance evolved into a healing of the earth, as I recall. And so I drove some of the other participants into a dance in which we buried some seeds and had a ritual about reseeding the land there, which has become very barren. But it occurs to me that this is not really, I mean, this is a Buddhist accretion of some older indigenous practices.
Yes, it's called Chud.
You might know what.
What's it called, Fred?
CHO with an umlaut with a D, Chud. Yes,
Should-
there are these. I have a couple of books on it, and I've seen it performed in
uh-huh.
various
Yeah.
temples, both in Nepal and
Yeah,
in
this is probably Nepal.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
The Dalai Lama, I mean, in his religion, they are keeping the demons away, aren't they, Fred? What's the general gist of
Oh, yeah,
they're doing?
yeah. What goes on within the Buddhist circles? I mean, that's pretty amazing because there was always a oracle, a court oracle for the Dalai Lama, and this oracle. Gosh, I don't have any pictures I can just bring up just in a second.
I
Take
do
me
have a
couple
picture
minutes.
of the oracle.
You do? Of the
Because
court
one of our
oracle?
members actually got to meet the oracle and sent us pictures, and she'll be coming on in a future to talk about that.
Oh, good, cool. Yes, yeah. The court oracle is, in fact, the Dalai Lama has been still using the court oracle up to this day. They wear as much as 80 pounds worth of stuff on their heads.
Yeah,
And you try
she
to dance
said it wasn't for
around without being in the
trance.
trance. And you know, try to put 80 pounds on your head and dancing around. You're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, but, you know, there's a lot that the Dalai Lama, even still to this day, employs the oracle, goes into the trance state and comes up with certain things in order to make decisions of state.
Yeah.
And I've seen this among the oracles in the Himalayas. I don't know if I mentioned did I mention this last time about this mass oracular performance?
Don't believe so.
I remember that.
Yeah.
About the possible construction of a ski run up in I didn't
No,
mention.
we didn't hear that story.
Oh, God, way up in my area. The government of India wanted to open up a ski run and therefore tourism and all of that. I think I did mention that, didn't I?
You did.
Yeah. And
And
all
they-
these deities
all
came
got
on. There were
together,
more
the
than 50
oracle.
deities that came on board. They all went into these ecstatic trance states, and they voted down the government's plan. Go ski run.
Power of the spirits. Yeah.
I
In
should-
action.
I should mention, we only have a few more minutes for questions, so don't wait till afterwards and then send me an email and ask me to ask Fred. Get on and ask it now. This is the time to do it. This is not the time to be shy. And this is a
Yeah.
fantastic. I want to just point out a couple things. Number one is having access to someone with this level of research and knowledge is such a special moment.
And experience and fieldwork and observation and translating and scholarship. Oh, yeah.
In addition to that,
Meeting you, Fred.
and in addition to that, prior to COVID, to hear someone of this caliber provide you with a presentation, you're going to have to go buy an airfare. You're going to have to rent a hotel room. You're going to have to take taxis. You're going to have to pay for dinners. And the whole deal of going to conferences to hear this quality of information. So I can't tell you how pleased we are and how blessed we are, Fred, to have you today. We've been really fortunate with people volunteering their time. These are professionals. These are
Who probably
academics.
command big fees to speak.
They generally command
Yeah.
big fees. So you've been treated very special today. So we're really appreciative.
Hey, thanks for giving me an idea of my retirement profession.
Except us.
But I will say one thing also. I was, I hadn't thought about saying it until just now, but there's a few times when I've actually also gone into such states. And so the question is, especially for a group like this, what is one's experience from within? I mean, what is the report from within the black hole?
Mm.
The reporter goes in from inside the black hole and tells you what it's like. And but from my own experience, and this a few times, not a professional or anything like that, not an oracle, but I do know what it's like to be inside of that state and be completely sunk into this dissociative condition of like really extreme focus and an intense kind of desire to become inside of that deity, as it were, whatever you want to call it. And then practically without knowing it, you kind of faint on the floor, right there. And people will give you space in such circumstances where there's a lot of people around. People know what's going on. They don't mind you. They just clear out a little space for you to, like, you know, be in your own mood as it is. And you enjoy your own mood, and they just clear out, and, you know, they continue with whatever they're doing. And then once you're out of your state, then you continue whatever it is you're doing. And but I will say that it's like having all of the channels in the body, like, cleansed, washed, pure, nothing but golden light shining through. And through every pore, every nadi, as they're called in Sanskrit, every channel.
Space between
in the nervous system and the veins and the arteries or whatever it is. But, you know, this kind of thing it'll last a little while. And then you can actually become, I mean, I never did it, but you can actually, you can see what's going on with other people. You can understand a situation. Like, I was in a certain place and where this happened, and then I was at a lunch out on a mountainside with about 25 or 30 people, and it was cooked outside on a fireplaces, and, you know, all, you know, some of them were people who were very, very close friends of mine, so I felt really protected. And there's no drugs involved, nothing like that. And but you're able to really see the inside of a situation. Withstanding and maintaining such a condition is not impossible, I suppose, but it's unlikely in the extreme. A few minutes is maybe what you get for most people. You know, maybe somebody whose whole life, like, there's a guy I know up in my village up in the Himalayas. Like, I stay with him sometimes during the performances, even though it's only like a couple of miles from my house. And he spent half his life in these states. And it's like, I never know who's quite talking, but it's such a joy to be around him. And, you know, he's really manifested all this stuff, you know, and he's the one, it's people like him that bring me in and tell the people, and if I have his support, then I'm welcome in. So he made me welcome, he made me a part of their culture of shamanism. This guy, Chandra Mohan is his name. And he, if it wasn't for him, I would never have been allowed on the inside of this, but he liked me for whatever reason. And, you know. So.
I noticed that our boundaries, you talked about the permeability of our boundaries and our self-identity. And it's through these states that our boundaries seem to dissolve, and we become as big as the universe momentarily, as tiny as a point. We disappear, we're magnetically pulled into Earth, we're thrown up, flying through the skies. We become one with an animal for a brief period. I mean, it's so delicious and sensory an experience. You get this energy wash through you. You get revived. Something happens to the very cells of your being, your ethereal body, your energy, whatever it is. It's so interesting. It just, you know, for Felicitas, it was the state of being human is not complete until you have touched those realms. You've befriended those realms. You've made friends on the other side. The doors are open and you are one with the universe. That's the experience of being human. However brief it is, it informs you, it changes you. Its alchemical process changes you. It's just part of our birthright to being alive. So
I know this is Stephanie from Marseille has a question.
Yes.
Are you actually in Marseille or nearby there?
I'm in Marseille. No, I can't go in Nepal yet.
Right. She's a question here. And what kind of trance experiences have you yourself been in the Himalaya? And I'll just say one thing here, and that's that familiarity will bring you closer to those states. And one of the things that I studied, in fact, I published an article on it somewhere, on this pilgrimage that I have done on a number of occasions and wish I could do again, and hopefully will, is this, it's about a 25 kilometer, 27 kilometer walk up the mountain from about, oh, you're in France, from about 2,500 meters to about 3,300 meters in elevation, where the goddess Ganga, the goddess of the Ganges, at her home in Gangotri, to her other home in a village called Mukwa, which nobody's ever been to except like a few people. It's because there's no road going there, so it's not on the tourist map exactly. But it's a pilgrimage that happens twice a year from one to the other, and there's a lot of possession that goes on that pilgrimage, and with that deity in particular. And there's whole groups. It gets to be very complicated, but there's a lot of trance states and ecstatic states that transpire in these. And yeah, you know, it's.
Yeah, excuse me, but do you think that the land itself is participating to this dreaming, to this ecstatic state? As you said at the beginning, all over India and even in Nepal, everything, every individual has a deity name. Every river has a deity name. I mean, all the landscape is divine by itself. And the earth, Bhudevi also, she's a divinity. And I've been discussing with a long-term practitioner of Vipassana, and I was able to listen to her, and she said that she was able to go to Burma, where Vipassana was cared for a long time.
Yeah.
And she even said, like, it comes from the land.
Mm-hmm.
The Dhamma or the Dharma, or in Sanskrit, or the Dhamma in Buddhist, the Dhamma come from the land. You know, I'm a Shakta. You know, I love very much Devi and her and the earth. So that's why I'm asking what you think of that.
Yes, I agree that the earth is a living being, first of all, planet Earth is a living being. And I believe we're doing this tremendous disservice by extracting fossil fuels endlessly from the earth. It's like bleeding the earth to death. Whenever I read about coal mining or oil extraction from the center of the earth, I mean, what are they doing? The earth is a living being. And but I also will say that about certain places. I mean, I believe there are certain places that are naturally sacred, and there's others where there has been sacredness that's been brought into a place.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? What does sacred mean? It means where there's certain energetic formations that are more powerful, or to which we can attune ourselves more easily.
But what about ritual in that sense? Because just as we can become more open to these realms by doing ritual, by going into trance, because we open it up, if we are doing ritual in a land historically for millennia, doesn't that help open up those channels in that land as well?
Yes, I'm sure that there is a give and take. There's a reciprocal process going on. The whole creative process has to be reciprocal, and we can't just take. We have to give back, and our ritual movements, like what you're doing at the Koimage Institute. I mean, these are ritual movements which are helping to replenish our, those forces which are supporting us.
Exactly, it's an exchange. Yeah.
An exchange. There has to be that exchange, and we can't survive without this exchange. This is one of the deepest lessons from the Vedic literature. The fundamental deep lesson is that there is this constant movement that has to go on for our survival, and we need to do our part of it, and we're not.
Yeah.
And we need to get back to doing that.
But our ancient peoples the world over knew that, and that was a good part of their ceremonies, of their rituals, was honoring the land, honoring the universe, honoring the living force that does sustain us.
Right.
They knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just go to.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that.
Yeah, and we just have a couple minutes left. Was it Marissa had her hand up, or Larissa had her hand up for the longest time, and then finally I think she gave up. But Larissa, if you still have your question and we haven't answered it, come on, turn your mic, and then Tony's going to be our final question, and then we're going to close.
And there's so many good comments in the chat. Is that possible to read some of those?
Well, they've been integrated into our conversation.
Okay,
so if there's more than that, we're going to have to have Fred come back. So
would you like to come back, Fred, to continue this at a later date?
Sure, at a later date. Why not?
Not next week or anything.
Not this week. Next year.
Yeah, in 2021. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I gave
Larissa.
that. Yeah, she didn't turn on her mic. Larissa, do you still want to ask a question? I could throw Tony on otherwise. And Tony, you can turn your mic on, and Larissa can join in after if that's the case. Tony, you want to have your final question?
Okay, thank you. I hope this is a quick one. Fred, there was a book I read long ago, I think maybe you read it also, by Isaac Bentall, called Stalking the Wild Pendulum.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And it somehow has always impressed me in my wanderings through the desert and in the Sahara and stuff like that. There is a sense of place, that there is things that are imparted by the actions in place. I'm wondering if you've integrated this at all with the experiences you were just talking about.
No, I really haven't thought about it from that perspective, but I'll get back to that. One person who I've been wondering about what they're thinking about this whole thing is Judy. Judy, what do you think about all of this?
Oh yeah, she's right there.
Oh, and he mentioned song, Judy, and you'll be sharing the power of song with us towards the end of the month.
Yeah, Judy,
Yeah.
turn on your mic.
Okay, yeah, just as a quick one too, on the website you have me down for the 22nd when I'm actually on the 29th.
Oh.
So you might want to just have a look. But yeah, I love all of this because, like I said, I've focused my intellect or energies on mostly the Peruvian Amazon area, although I have some limited experience in some of the other Latin American countries. But yes, certainly the things about the possession and sacred space, absolutely with the land. You know, when I've spent so many months, years in the Amazon jungle, you can feel that land breathing. You know, the trees talk. I mean, I go out and I greet the spirits of my yard every single morning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wonderful to hear the differences. I like to find the commonalities in the shamanism practices around the world too. So yeah, Fred, that's been wonderful. Hey,
I look forward to your session.
Yeah, that's the
Well, per
29th.
your suggestion, Judy has said she will share a song with us. That is, yeah, the whole big story, the power of song.
Yeah,
So,
very cool.
to take us, yeah. So
so
that's the 29th.
Yes.
Judy will be our special guest.
And next Sunday is
Energy medicine, Christine Van Poel,
Cool.
Barbie on Reiki, Maria Dozer on hands-on healing, and Joseph Goldfeder on the meridians because of his work with acupuncture. We'll have a panel discussion
yeah.
on energy medicine and why it works at a distance.
So as the
Final
person
words, final
as the
comments.
person who conducts the ritual of keeping track of time, unfortunately that comes to me. I want to say that we fulfilled 2 hours easily, and we obviously could go longer. But I think I'm going to ask you all to say thank you to Tony. You can.
And Fred.
I'm
Fred's our
sorry.
guest.
I keep saying Tony.
Okay, let's just move on. Fred, do you have any concluding remarks to summarize this before we open it up
Fred,
to our
sorry
thank
about
yous
that.
and hellos?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, I think concluding remarks, I mean, would be like the end of Beethoven's Third Symphony. It would just go on for like lots of these quoted, whatever. So
Okay.
I think I'll just leave it at that.
I think we've worn you out.
Thank you so much.
you,
And
Fred.
and I thought maybe it'd be of interest to know that you and Tony were roommates back in college. So there is that
A long
really
history that
long
you'll
history
have.
of friendship. brotherhood or whatever you want to call it. So I'm trying to excuse myself from making the mistake with names. But anyway, thank you so much. I turn on everybody's mics. Everybody say goodbye and thank you, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quite amazing.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Bye. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Paul.
That's Dory.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Namaste. Namaste.
Namaste. Yeah,
Namaste.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good to say.
appropriate.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, and
Each
Bobby.
one of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby,
I
good to
recognize
see you,
Bobby's
Bobby.
here. Hi there.
Yeah, Barbie and Dory and Sheldon and Elizabeth and Helen, TH and VJ and Larissa and Karen.
There's Larissa.
Another Karen.
Yeah.
Lawson.
Awesome.
Another
Yay.
Melissa Moss. Yeah. And yeah, of course we said Judy and Tony already. And
Yeah.
thank you all so much. It's fantastic to have your participation. Join us next week and also for the works and the events throughout the week. We have a special event Monday night for
Oh, we do. We're
Down
going to
Under.
explore divination. So come and join part of our divination experience.
Go to the website to figure it out.
via Ecstatic Trance Postures on Monday.
Yeah, Monday,
at
late
3
afternoon,
p.m.
late
Yeah, it's
afternoon,
afternoon.
and evening and
That's so-
on the east.
New Zealand and Australia can
Yeah,
join us.
It won't work for you in Europe.
Yeah,
Listen.
I know. You want to get out.
It's a good hour.
Yeah.
I'm off
All
now,
right,
but 2
kids.
in the
Thank you
morning.
so much. We love it.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Okay.
Fred. Thank you,
Yeah.
Pablo. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, Fred, we really appreciate all the fieldwork,
All the best.
stories that we don't often get to hear.
We'll send you an email.
The
Okay.
more.
All right.
Oh, he's exhausted. Go take a nap.